She's got wire buried in her neck. Actual wire. Like someone tied her collar so tight, it just kept sinking in. That was the first thing I said, standing in the middle of the Safeway parking lot, with a trembling puppy in my arms. It was early November, the kind of cold where your breath fogs and your fingertips sting if you forget your gloves. I had stopped by the grocery store on my way home from work, same as always. Nothing about that day was meant to be remarkable, but then I saw her, a small mud-caked puppy, darting between parked cars like a shadow with a heartbeat. At first, I thought she was chasing something, but when I got closer, I realized she wasn't chasing anything. She was running from everyone. No one else seemed to notice her. Or maybe they just didn't want to. People rushed in and out of the store with turkeys and stuffing, preparing for Thanksgiving. But I stopped. I crouched beside my truck and waited. It took 10 minutes before she even looked at me, and another 20 before she got close enough to sniff my fingers. Her eyes were what got me. Not just the fear in them, but something else, like she was asking, is this time different? Will someone stay? I named her Clover right there on the asphalt. Her fur was matted and patchy, and she carried that sour smell of something that had been rained on, dried, and rained on again. But her eyes, soft golden brown, glowed when the sun hit them just right. I didn't have a leash. I didn't even have a towel. So I wrapped her in my flannel overshirt and held her close. That's when I felt it. The collar, or what was left of one. It was thin wire, almost like picture frame wire, twisted several times around her neck, buried beneath layers of fur and skin. I brushed the fur aside gently, and she flinched so violently, I nearly dropped her. That was when I said it, loud and without thinking, she's got wire buried in her neck. A woman unloading groceries glanced at me, then quickly turned away. The vet's office was already closed, but I called their emergency line anyway. The tech who answered told me to bring her in, and that a vet named Dr. Langston would meet me there. I drove the whole way with Clover on my lap, one hand on the wheel, the other stroking her face. She didn't bark or whine. She just kept those wide eyes on me, like I was the first solid thing she'd ever known. Dr. Langston was tall, silver-haired, with kind hands and tired eyes. She took one look at Clover and led us straight into an exam room. She didn't ask too many questions, just started working. Clover whimpered as they shaved around her neck. That was the first time I saw the wound clearly. Angry red skin, raw and swollen. The wire so tight in places, it had nearly disappeared beneath the flesh. They sedated her. I stood outside the glass door and watched as Dr. Langston worked on Clover. Langston and her tech worked for over an hour, slowly teasing out the embedded strands. When it was done, Clover looked like a different dog. Still frail, still scared, but lighter somehow. The vet handed me a small Ziploc bag with the wire inside, coiled like a cruel little relic. Whoever did this, she said quietly, didn't expect her to survive. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, paid the bill, and took Clover home. My place isn't much, a 2-bedroom farmhouse on the edge of town, just past where the pavement turns to gravel. I live alone, unless you count the radio and the wild rabbits that nibble at the garden. But that night, I had company. Clover curled into a ball at the foot of my bed, her breath slow and shallow. She didn't move once. Over the next few days, she barely ate. I tried chicken broth, warm rice, even scrambled eggs, but she only picked at it. What she did respond to was touch. I'd sit with her on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, and she'd rest her chin on my knee, like it was the only place she'd ever been warm. The townsfolk began to ask questions. I run the hardware store, so people see me every day. Mr. Palmer, who's been getting nails and lumber from us since before I was born, leaned over the counter and asked, "That your new pup?" I told him her name. I didn't say anything about the wire. He just nodded. Saw her running wild last week. Figured she belonged to someone out near the mill. That was the first thread. I went to the old sawmill a few days later. It hadn't been in use for over a year, ever since the owner went bankrupt. But there were still shacks nearby, remnants of a time when men with calloused hands and loud laughter filled the place with life. I found the remains of a food bowl beneath one of the porches, and a broken chain that looked far too much like the wire Dr. Sniff Langston had pulled from Clover's neck. But no one was there. I drove back home with a strange feeling in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite grief, something in between. That night, Clover wagged her tail for the first time. It wasn't much, a slow, hesitant swish, but it was enough to make me smile so wide my cheeks hurt. She started eating after that. First, small bites, then full bowls. She still didn't bark, not once, but she'd follow me from room to room like a shadow with fur. She had a way of looking at things, too, long and deliberate, as if memorizing the world before it could vanish. 3 weeks in, she found her voice. I was in the backyard repairing a section of fence when a squirrel darted across the lawn. Clover sat on the porch, ears perked, and without thinking, she let out a short, surprised yip. She froze, as if unsure the sound had come from her. I laughed out loud. She barked again, louder this time, then ran straight into my arms. That afternoon, I took her to the park. It was chilly, but sunny, and the leaves were that perfect mix of gold and fire. Clover sniffed everything: trees, benches, strollers. A little girl dropped her mitten, and Clover picked it up gently, bringing it back to her. The mother gasped, "She's so sweet. Is she a rescue?" I looked down at Clover, who was now sitting beside the girl, tail thumping happily. "Yeah," I said, "she rescued me." The next few weeks passed in a gentle rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and Clover's warm nose nudging my hand. Afternoons meant walks along the creek or errands in town. She rode shotgun, head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Everyone started to know her. Even Miss Lorna at the diner kept a slice of turkey for her behind the counter. But not everything healed at once. There were still nights when she whimpered in her sleep, paws twitching like she was running from something. Sometimes she'd wake and slink into the bathroom, curling up behind the shower curtain like she was hiding. I never forced her out. I'd sit on the floor and talk to her softly until she came back. One snowy evening in mid-December, I found a Christmas card tucked under the door at the shop. No name, just a photo. It was Clover, younger, maybe just a few weeks old, sitting beside 2 other puppies. Behind them, a man stood shirtless, his face cut off by the flame. There was something wrong with the way he held the chain leash. Too tight, too angry. On the back of the photo was a note. "Didn't think she'd make it. Guess I was wrong." That night, I locked all the doors. I kept the porch light on. And I let Clover sleep on the bed, curled up beside me, her breath slow and even. The next morning, she barked at the mailman for the first time. A proper bark, full-throated and proud. Life doesn't fix itself overnight, but sometimes it gives you just enough light to keep going. Clover was more than a rescue. She was a reminder that even when people fail you, when the world turns sharp and cold, there can still be warmth, still be kindness, still be a tail that wags when you walk through the door. We didn't go looking for each other, but we found each other anyway. It was the sound of her nails tapping against the wooden floor that woke me. Clover had taken to wandering the house in the early mornings, as if inspecting her kingdom. I lay still, listening as she made a slow circuit around the living room, into the kitchen, then finally stopped outside my door. A soft rustle, then the gentle creak of her body curling up against the wood. She didn't scratch or whine, just waited. That was her way. From that day forward, Clover wasn't just surviving, she was living. She learned to trust, not because the past vanished, but because the present gave her something worth believing in. And I learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting the world, but choosing to protect one small, broken soul who never thought they deserved to be loved. Because Clover didn't just heal, she taught me how to heal too. And every morning, when she presses her warm body against my leg and looks up with those soft golden eyes, I whisper the same promise I made that day in the parking lot. You're safe now, and you always will be.